and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 571. And today's date is January 21st, 2015. And the title of this episode is Switzerland depegs from EU and joins China with an offshore yuan trading center in Zurich. Let's get into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand the U.S. government, the central bankers, they will do everything in their power to prop up the system. They don't want it to collapse just yet. Why? Because they're waiting for that event. They're waiting for war. They're waiting for a group, like a terrorist group, or a country, or a combination of both, to take all eyes off the U.S. government and the central bankers and put all eyes on this other group, country, or combination to blame the entire collapse on. This is what they've been waiting for. So they've been propping up the entire system. This is what they've been doing. And we see right now from all their programs they're implementing and how they're protecting themselves. For example, they're protecting themselves from the derivative crash by putting a rider in the spending bill where it protects them and insures them from a crash through the FDIC, which is basically the taxpayers. We also see that they put programs in place to give anyone with a heartbeat an auto loan. But we see this is kind of backfiring because a lot of people are delinquent on their auto loans and their cars are getting repossessed. So they're taking this very successful program and they're moving it over to real estate. And we can see that Fannie and Freddie will give anyone with a heartbeat a mortgage. All you have to do is put 3% down. Actually, a lot of the new home builders will make up the difference. They'll actually pay for closing costs. And we can see right now that we will see a bump up. I reported on this because of this program. People are going to say, you know what? I'm underemployed. I have a part-time job, but the State of the Union address was out there. He says we're in a recovery. We're at 5.6% unemployment. Things are getting better. And from consumer confidence, I do believe that I will be making more as time goes on because the president told me that wages are going up. But we know this is a complete lie. We know this is fake, phony, and false. But we know we will see this bump up because people will believe and they will go out and purchase their home. And we see from the Mortgage Banker Association, they're saying that mortgage application and refinance applications, which are combined, they have risen by 14.2% in the week ending January 16th. But what's really interesting is that the gauge of loan requests for home purchases, a leading indicator of home sales, dipped by 2.5%. So we will see a bump up, but this will eventually die off because people will not be able to make the payments. They will become late payments and eventually foreclose. And what we're seeing is the same thing that happened back in 2007, 2008. They're taking these homes where people were paying their mortgage or had their mortgage paid off, selling it to these people that really don't have full-time secure jobs because we know those don't exist right now. And eventually, once they foreclose, the Fed will come in and scoop these up from the bank. They're stealing the wealth from the people and at the same time inflating the bubble further and further. But what we're seeing is that building permits have slid for the second month in a row. For the second month in a row, building permits dropped and missed expectations. The 1.9% month-on-month drop in December was a notable miss against expectations of a 0.6% rise. And we also know that KB Homes also reports that traffic is starting to slow. Sales are not going up. Actually, they're declining. So we can see something is going on right now. We see housing starts for single-family homes have increased. And what's very interesting is that the multifamily starts are now dropping. And we have to remember, the multifamily homes were being purchased by investment companies, hedge funds, foreign investors. They were using cash to pay for them. They were renting them out, and they're trying to unload them as fast as they possibly can right now. And this is exactly what we're seeing. They are blowing this bubble up as big as they possibly can. I mean, the government, the central bankers have protected themselves from this crash. I mean, look what they did with the derivatives. They put a rider on the spending bill where if something happens, the FDIC will insure against the derivative crash. Actually, the taxpayers will pay for this. So they protected themselves. They know what's coming. They knew what they had to do. And our government looks the other way. It's everything for themselves and the central bankers, nothing for the people. And this is what our government is all about. Now, we understand the president gave his State of the Union. And we understand that the government officials were all out there clapping. He coughs, they clap. He blinks, they clap. There's more clapping than actual speech. Because they have to reinforce that, yes, we are the best, the brightest, and the people are beneath us. And you can just see this as you watch this. It's absolutely ridiculous. But there are certain things that he didn't mention during his speech, which he would never mention, and that today's young Americans, for example, are the first generation to be poorer than their parents. He didn't mention that. They will also pay all their lives into a retirement system that won't be there for them when they get there. Young Americans indebt themselves more than anyone else on the planet to attend university, requiring them to spend a large part of their careers paying off that debt. Americans of all ages are earning less than they did 2 decades ago when adjusted for inflation, yet they're paying more in taxes. And U.S. taxation is increasing burden not only in quantity but complexity. According to the IRS itself, tax requirements have become so confusing and the compliance burden so great that taxpayers are giving up their U.S. citizenship in record numbers. In fact, over 14% of all federal tax revenue collected goes to pay interest on the debt. Another 20% goes toward destruction, war, bombs, drones, and spying and aid to other countries. They also create roughly 200 pages of new rules and regulations every single day. These rules govern something as sacred as what you cannot put in your own body, or even make it more difficult to do business. He didn't mention any of this. But when we look at what he said and how they were patting themselves on the back, it was all a lie. I mean, let's break it down a little bit here of what he actually said. Our economy is growing and creating jobs at the fastest pace since 1999. He said, at this moment, with a growing economy, shrinking deficits, bustling industry, and booming energy production, we have risen from the recession freer to write our own future than any other nation on earth. Well, the fact is, job growth has been fueled in part by lower paying jobs in areas such as retail and restaurants. He didn't mention all those retail stores that are closing, all those people that are being laid off. Not a mention anywhere of that. We have replaced many higher-paying positions in manufacturing and construction with these low-paying jobs. Part-time jobs also remain elevated. There are still 1.7 million fewer workers with full-time jobs than when the recession began in 2007. Didn't mention that at all, but that is the fact. Obama says, thanks to the growing economy, the recovery is touching more and more lives. Wages are finally starting to rise again. We know that more small business owners plan to raise their employers' pay than at any time since 2007. The facts are, a survey of small businesses by the National Federation of Independent Business does show that a rising proportion plan to raise wages, but planning to and actually doing it are two different things. Actually, what we're seeing is there are more businesses that are going out of business that are being created right now. Actually, most of these businesses are not hiring at this time. And we can see also that the average hourly earnings rose only 1.7% in December from 12 months earlier, according to the Labor Department. That's about half the rate that is typically of a healthy economy and actually lower than the previous month. So are we actually seeing a job recovery? If we go back to the year 2001 and we look at the graph, we see the percent of U.S. population employed was around 64%. In 2006, it was at 63.5%. Today, we're at 59.2%. Where is the recovery? When we look at the hourly wages, we see, yes, the UMich for expected higher income has gone off the charts. People are expecting higher incomes, but reality, real averagely earnings, has dropped. So yes, people might be believing it, but it is not there whatsoever. He also talked about climate change. That the best scientists in the world are telling us that our activities are changing the climate. Well, that's completely false, fake, and phony. Actually, the sun controls the climate here on Earth. Actually, most of these scientists that are claiming this, they are getting funded by the government. Actually, most of the world right now is not believing what he is saying. Actually, what is going on here is he needs a carbon tax. This is what they've been pushing for. Because Obamacare didn't work. So they're looking to bring in more and more revenue. They're trying to tell us that the world is getting warmer, but we're seeing it's getting colder. Actually, we're having another freezing cold winter. But what's more interesting is that all these billionaires who are fighting climate change flew over in 1,700 private jets. What does that tell you? Why didn't they go together on one jet? Or two? Why did they all have to take individual jets and pollute the earth if this is what they're fighting for? So we know this is all fake, phony, and false. The cost of community college for all will be zero. Well, we can see right now that most of the people today had some type of college. They went to community college, and we can see by the statistics is that more people have attended college than any time in the history of the United States, but less people have work, or less people have high-paying jobs. What does that tell you? There are no jobs out there. But what's interesting about this is that the debt for student loans continually increases. Why? Because they need to pump up the bubbles. He also says, Americans, we cherish our civil liberties. We cherish our rights. Then why is the government setting up free speech zones? Why are they trying to take our rights away from talking freely on the internet? Why are they taking our rights away about how the police can search us at any time? Why are they taking our right to own a weapon away? This is all happening right now. And we can see they're pushing legislation, like the president's own version of CISPA, which he said he would veto, but now he won't, because we knew that he set up executive orders a long time ago to support this, to take control of the internet and to share all your private information. He also said that Russia is now isolated and their economy is in tatters, which is actually the opposite. The countries that isolated them is Europe, United States, Canada, and Australia. The rest of the countries, Africa, Asia, South America, Mexico, they're not isolating them. So they're really not isolated whatsoever. And we can see whatever he says is just lies. Continuous, ongoing lies. He also said in Iraq and Syria, American leadership, including our military power, is stopping the Islamic State advance. Are they really? Because the last time I looked, the Islamic State has tripled the amount of territory in Syria. So where are they stopping the advance? Actually, it's gotten worse. That we're not going to put boots on the ground. Lie once again. The fact is that they have tripled. The fact is they commandeered an air base. The fact is they set up a division headquarters that can support 30,000 troops. The fact is they're bringing in military assets into Kuwait, into depots there, to get ready for the offensive in Syria. The fact is, McCain, Biden, and other government officials, even Obama, is calling for boots on the ground in Syria. Again, more lies. This is what the president is telling us, and he is not going by facts. Yes, he can manipulate the numbers all he wants. He can tell lies and show his people in the audience. For every one person that was unemployed that got a job, I can show 10 that didn't. So everything that he's showing us is absolutely ridiculous. It's to convince the American public and the world that everything is fine, and they are pushing as hard as they can to show that we are in a recovery, because this will fit perfectly into their plan to show that another country, another group, caused the collapse. And you can see right now they're pushing war all over the globe to make this happen. Now, we understand the United States government, the central bankers, they have been, with other nations, have been suppressing the oil prices. They're trying to destroy the economies of like Venezuela, Nigeria, Iran, Syria, North Korea, Russia, any economy, any country that is not working with the private Western central bank system. They're trying to destroy at this point. But we can see that by doing this, it's having other effects. Right now, it is being projected that the U.S. oil rig count will decline by 15% in the first quarter of 2015 alone. And when there are less rigs operating, that means less workers, and more people are going to get fired. Last week, 55 more oil rigs shut down. That was the largest single-week decline in the United States in 24 years. Oil field services provided by Baker Hughes, they're laying off about 7,000 people. Schlumberger's laying off about 9,000. Suncor is eliminating 1,000 workers. Halliburton's energy industry operations have slowed down dramatically, so they give them pink slips to about 1,000 workers last month. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas is projecting that 140,000 jobs related to the energy industry will be lost in the state of Texas alone during 2015. So actually, by doing this, they're actually hurting the job situation here in the United States a lot more. And we can see it will not get better, because there is a new report out there. And they're saying by 2019, more than 212 million people will be out of work, compared to currently 201 million, according to the report by the World Employment and Social Outlook Trends of 2015. More than 61 million jobs have been lost since the start of the global crisis in 2008, and our projections show that unemployment will continue to rise until the end of the decade. This means that job crisis is far from over. Youth unemployment rates will continue to be a major problem. Young workers, age 15 to 24, have been particularly hit by the crisis. They're predicting social unrest. Now you start to understand why all these countries right now are training their police officers to handle civil disobedience. Spain's doing it, France doing it. The European Union have already established a police force. The United States is doing it, and many other nations are ramping up their police forces. Of course, this is for terrorism. No, it's not. They're using this as a cover. With people's trust in governments being undermined, the risk of social unrest is very high, the report says. Social unrest is particularly acute in countries and regions where youth unemployment is high or rising rapidly. And we see this all throughout Europe, here in the United States, and many other countries. It has started, and they're warning that this is going to have a dramatic effect on how countries handle the situation. And we can see they're building up their forces, their police forces, to handle what is coming. They know the collapse is coming. They realize that it is here, and they only have a short period of time to build up their forces. This is why we see all this happening. This is why they're out there taking away the people's rights. It's not because of terrorism. They're using this as a cover, the excuse to build up the police forces in each and every one of these countries. We see Nigeria hurting. We see Venezuela hurting from what is going on with these oil prices. But don't worry, all the world leaders that are meeting in Davos, these are the richest men in the world, have proclaimed in Davos that we need a central bank of oil, like the central bank in the financial world. Actually, do we really need this? Do we really need them controlling the oil in one location? No, we don't. This would just make the situation A lot better for them, worse for us. This means they'll be able to just control everything. The IMF that sparked the greatest concerns as it warned oil producers to treat this oil price drop as permanent, noting that they expect these economies to lose $300 billion. I don't believe it's permanent. Actually, every time the IMF comes out there and tells us something, they're always wrong. Remember when they told us that Greece was fine after the first tranche, then the second one, then the third one? When they told us that Europe was going to be recovering 2 years ago, a year ago? Here we are today. Completely wrong. It's an illusion. And we can see that they're trying to take control of everything right now. This cannot happen. But we understand that Switzerland has seen the writing on the wall. They looked around and said, you know something, we can't be a part of the system anymore. We need to depeg from the euro, and this is exactly what they did. And of course, the central bankers are out there saying, this is the worst thing ever. Switzerland's really going to feel it. Actually, no, it's the central bankers that are going to feel it. But what's very interesting about all this is that China and Switzerland, they are going to announce an offshore yuan trading center in Zurich. Zurich is set to become a center for yuan trading in Europe, with Chinese Swiss officials poised to sign a financial deal on Wednesday, which is today. It is an important step in the internationalization of the renminbi, especially in Europe. The government official was quoted. Switzerland is basing its push for the offshore yuan business on the country's close ties with China, one of the nation's biggest trading partners. Switzerland is the first country among the world's top 20 to have a free trade agreement with China. Chinese and Swiss central banks already signed a bilateral currency swap agreement worth 150 billion yuan in July last year. Under the deal to be signed on Wednesday, China will give Switzerland a quota of about 50 billion yuan. That's $8 billion under its qualified foreign institutional investor scheme to support the establishment of the Zurich offshore renminbi market. The first branch of the Chinese bank will be set up in this Swiss financial hub for future renminbi clearance. China is promoting the use of its currency as an alternative to the dollar in global trade and finance, and more nations now want to capture the fast-growing market for offshore trading in yuan. The Chinese currency is already trading directly against the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, the British pound, the Aussie, the New Zealand dollars, Russia's ruble, the Singapore dollar, and the Malaysian's ringgit. And we can see right now the push is to get away from the dollar. And we can see countries have already made many bilateral trade agreements with China. I mean, we're looking at New Zealand, Australia, Switzerland, Europe, UK, Canada. But United States, not really. And we can see they're protecting themselves for what is coming. They understand what is coming, and they are protecting themselves. And we can see Switzerland is right out there in front saying, yeah, we're just going to go with China right now. Forget euro. We see what's happening. We understand the entire system's collapsing, and China's system is the new system coming into power. Now, am I saying this is going to be better in the long run? No. Most likely, it will get corrupt, just like every system does. But right now, it is the alternative to the US dollar. But the central bankers are going to fight as hard as they possibly can to stop this. And what does that mean? It means war. Now, we understand Obama created an a memorandum that allows the people who are coming into this country illegally to stay in this country. Basically what it does is it says to all government agencies, do not touch these illegals. They can stay in the country. Do not deport them. And we can see that he kind of delayed his memorandum until after the elections because he realized the American people are not for this whatsoever. He knew that this was being driven by the corporation central bankers. They wanted the illegals in here because they bypass the penalties in bringing them into work, where the businesses do not have to pay a penalty for having them employed because they're not covered by Obamacare. And we can see right now that the American people are completely against this. 56% of Americans want to defund Obama's immigration order. The poll was conducted on January 13th to the 15th. 56% of Americans want Congress to defund Obama's November executive action. It's more like a memorandum. And this is coming from an ABC News poll. And we can see right now that this is why he waited for after the elections, because he knew the people did not want this, and he knew the people would object to this, so he held off on it. Now, we see Obamacare is having a little bit of trouble. We understand there is a lawsuit going on that could bring Obama's federal health care system crashing down. And we understand that they are pushing forward with this lawsuit, and there are obvious points in the United States Supreme Court that President Obama or any other president should not be permitted to rewrite federal statutes in brazen violation of the U.S. Constitution, separation of powers. At its heart, the lawsuit argues the meaning of the words and whether the government can lawfully double think and change the meanings of words such as state. And they do this quite often. They just change the meanings wherever they want to fit their agenda. Under Section 36B of the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, tax subsidies are restricted to individuals who purchase health insurance through an exchange established by the state under 1311 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Similar wording occurs in 8 other locations throughout the Affordable Care Act. And we can see right now that if this lawsuit goes through, 87% of the individuals who enrolled in Obamacare would stop receiving subsidies from the government, and they would not be able to afford health insurance because health insurance is just way too expensive. And we can see right now Obama is fighting it. The lawyers are out there fighting it. And of course, as we know, the NSA has been spying on all of these people. We've seen it done before where they get into the Supreme Court judge and all of a sudden they just rule in favor of Obama, even though it is completely unconstitutional. Actually, Obamacare is completely unconstitutional. But then again, the judge who was saying it's unconstitutional, one day he woke up and said, okay, it's unconstitutional. He said, it's fine, go forward with it, and then he left the country for 2 weeks. So we can see right now they're doing everything they possibly can to continually push these laws on us, which the Congress does not read because they're not allowed to read it, or no one actually took the time to read it. They just believed whatever the White House said. Now again, the Congress then is not working for the people. They're not working in the best interest of the people, because every single piece of legislation that goes across their desk, they need to read it and understand it and say, is this for the central bankers, for businesses, or is this for the people? Well, if it's for the central bankers and businesses, veto. We will not accept this. Send it away. But again, the entire government, most of them anyway, are completely corrupt at this point, and they're in it for themselves, for the money, for the prestige, for the control, for the power, and not for the American people. Now, very interestingly, the film creator of row.State, David Crowley, and his wife and his 5-year-old daughter, all of a sudden just died. And they're being investigated right now, and the investigators are treating this as suspicious while the investigation gets underway. Now, this is very interesting because he was making a film about RFID chips being implanted into people's arm, where people are being tracked, where NSA is tracking every single person, where there is martial law, where the government is taking away our rights and freedoms, and how it all unfolds. Now, I have a small clip here on the X22Report.com, and I also have it on YouTube, and you can see just behind the clip exactly what they were afraid of. They most likely didn't want this to go any further, so something might just have happened. We've seen this with a lot of bankers. We've seen this with a lot of people where all of a sudden people just end up dead. Now, we understand out in Ukraine, they still owe money to Russia, about $2.5 million, and they're on a prepay schedule right now to get the gas. And right now, it looks like they don't want to pay once again. And Yatsenyuk is out there saying, well, this whole matter will have to be figured out in court because we're not paying at this time, and we're showing that we overpaid and actually Russia owes us money. And we can see right now they're using a lot of double talk. This is what governments like to do, and they like to put it into courts to keep it all tied up. And right now, I wouldn't be surprised if Russia shuts the gas off. We'll see as time goes on. Will they shut it off right at the start of the non-payment? No, they'll let it go for a couple months, and then eventually they'll say enough is enough. But then again, we see that war is being ramped up right now, and we can see that Kiev, the U.S. government, NATO, they're doing everything they possibly can to push the war agenda as hard as they possibly can. Now we can see that Russia is working with these southeastern people. They're telling them, listen, Putin created the Minsk peace deal. We agreed on a ceasefire. Let's show good faith and withdraw some of our heavy artillery off the line. And we'll show that we're looking to have peace right now. And this is exactly what they're doing. They're removing some of their heavy weaponry. They're disengaging to show that they want peace. They want talks to continue. But guess what? Ukrainian President Poroshenko, he doesn't want peace. Kiev does not have anything to negotiate in Berlin. He's not showing up for any of the other peace talks to talk about what is going on. He's saying everything was laid out in the Minsk deal. He won't even show up to that. Actually, he's rejecting the plans from Putin. Putin is out there saying, come on, let's have peace. Let's calm down here. Let's look at the situation. Let's have peace. But no, he doesn't want peace. They want war. This is what they've been ramping up for. The EU says change of anti-Russia sanctions depends on the situation in Ukraine. The change of European Union sanctions policy towards Russia depends on the implementation of the Minsk agreement. And the bloc is open for dialogue with Moscow. Well, wait a minute. Putin put forth the Minsk deal. They're abiding by the Minsk deal. They're removing their heavy weaponry. So what else do they need to do? Well, as Kiev continually attacks, the people are going to defend themselves, and there's a no-win situation. And this is exactly what they're doing. Poroshenko is out there, and he's saying that Russia has about 9,000 soldiers currently backing up the pro-Moscow fighters. Actually, they're not pro-Moscow fighters. They're people of the southeastern region that didn't want to be part of the puppet government in Kiev. He's saying that there's 500 tanks and heavy artillery out there. And of course, there's absolutely no proof whatsoever. Now we see NATO is out there, and NATO's Jens Stoltenberg is out there screaming and yelling that Russians are here. The Russian forces and heavy equipment in Ukraine and a high number of Russian forces are on the border, and this does not contribute to a peaceful solution. But Russia is out there saying, well, that's absolutely ridiculous. Right now, Ukraine and the U.S. and NATO have satellites continuously circulating above this territory, and the borders are also controlled by unmanned aerial vehicles. So where is all this coming from? They know what's going on, and of course, guess what? They haven't given any proof. Actually, this sounds like a repeat of what was happening back in 2014. It's the same exact propaganda. Flashback, here we are again, exactly where we were. Ukraine's President Poroshenko rejected a peace plan proposed to him last week by Putin. Russia has consistently undertaken efforts as an intermediary in regulating the conflict. NATO's Stoltenberg is out there saying, concerned about escalation in Ukraine, have seen presence of Russian forces in Ukraine. We just have no proof. We call on Russia to stop support of separatists. We call on Russia to respect international obligations. We call on Russia to uphold Minsk agreements. See an increase of Russia heavy equipment in Ukraine. Russia have high number of forces on border. There are Russian forces inside Ukraine. See an increase in Russian equipment in Ukraine. This doesn't contribute to peaceful solution, but we just have no proof. We have no satellite images. We have absolutely nothing. Just go by what we say. Because if you didn't believe us back in 2014, you have to believe us now. We tried giving you the black and white satellite photos from 1970. Well, that didn't work out too well because we photoshopped them. You didn't believe us. So we're doing the same thing again, and hopefully you'll believe us this time. And we can see that this is all fake. It's phony. They're trying to gin up war. That is it. And we're seeing what the West is trying to do. The West is trying to play Putin off as a party to the conflict, to isolate him in international politics, to strangle the Russia's economy, to get him overthrown. They want regime change. They want it in China, they want it in Russia, and this is what they're trying to do. They tried to get rid of Putin when MH17 was shot down. Both of his planes, they were flying very near to each other, and they look almost exactly alike. And I think they were trying to, most likely, get rid of Putin so they can have a different leader take his place, which would be controlled by the central banks, by the U.S. government. A puppet government, but it didn't work out. And we can see right now, Ukraine will force now about 200,000 more into the army. Forget about 50,000. According to a military prosecutor, Anatoly Mateos, there will be 3 waves of mobilization in 2015. The overall plan is to call 200,000 Ukrainians into military service. Ukraine will begin on January 20th with 50,000. Then there will be mandatory training at training centers. The next wave of fighters will be in March of 2015 and taken over the government. They have taken over the presidential palace. They're holding the president right now, and I understand the latest reports that they've come to some type of an agreement, but the U.S. is sending Navy warships to the Red Sea. They're issuing warnings and heightening security, and looks like they're trying to evacuate personnel from the embassy inside of Yemen. And this is absolutely true. The leader of the people of Yemen is saying that no one, including the president, is above any measures. And that is true for every single place in the world. If the people are not happy, these government officials need to step down. Because what's going to happen, like we've seen in history time and time again, the people will eventually rise up and say, you know what, if you're not going to step down, we will make you step down. And we've seen this over and over. Now, we see in Libya, it is not a full ceasefire, it is a partial ceasefire. The State Department is issuing travel warnings for Libya. They're saying that extremist groups in Libya have made several specific threats against U.S. government officials, citizens, and interests in Libya. Because of the presumption that foreigners, especially U.S. citizens in Libya, may be associated with the U.S. government or U.S. non-governmental organizations, travelers should be aware that they may be targets. And it seems like they're trying to get everyone out of the country because it looks like eventually the U.S. government central bankers will make their move in Libya. They're getting prepared to do so. And we understand they're getting ready to put boots on the ground in Syria. Joe Biden made the case for boots on the ground in Syria during an interview. And we know this is the end game. The end game is to get Assad. We see the territory has now tripled since the Islamic State has been there. This has been their plan since 2013 when they had that chemical weapons attack where they wanted the U.S. to go in there and bomb the area to allow the Free Syrian Army to gain that territory. But now they're using the Islamic State, which is their proxy army. Responding to the fact that the Islamic State is gaining ground in Syria, which isn't happening, the vice president went there where President Obama probably wishes he did not. Biden said the reason Obama's plan is failing was because there was no troops to combat the Islamic State. Basically, they want to bring that in to reinforce what is going to happen in Syria, and that is attack against Assad. Biden said that America must double down on the current strategy against the Islamic State. And a lot of government officials are saying, yes, we need boots on the ground. Actually, the president called on Congress to pass new authorization to use military force against the Islamic State at the State of the Union. But Congress is saying he didn't give us any details of what he wants to do. He didn't give us the specifics. Is he putting boots on the ground? What is he doing? No specifics whatsoever. We see out in Europe that Europe is beefing up their police forces, like I said before. France will create 2,680 extra anti-terror staff inside their country. That means they're going to put more troops on the ground. Spain. The Popular Party has used the latest attack on Charlie Hebdo to introduce new amendments to two pieces of legislation going through Congress. The first one, the Citizen Security Law, and the second one, the Criminal Procedure Code. An amendment to Article 573 of the CPC aims at punishing, with imprisonment of between 1 to 8 years, those who on a daily or regular basis access online communications, services, or acquire or are in possession of documents which target or because of their content result in inciting others to decide to join terrorist organizations or groups. In other words, anyone who accesses the websites deemed to be supporting terrorism could find themselves in prison. Another prepared before the attacks will legitimize mass surveillance. The police and security services will be able to tap mobile phones and intercept electronic communications without the authorization of a judge, use false identities on the internet, plant electronic surveillance devices, and collect DNA of arrested persons without their consent, of that of a judge, and without a lawyer being present, and install software to extract information from someone's computer. The circumstances in which this will be allowed are so broad that it could be applied to everyone. The government is currently passing the Citizen Security Law, commonly called the Gag Law, which represents the biggest attack on democratic rights. The law, which is opposed by 82% of Spaniards, is an attempt to prevent and suppress mass demonstrations which are not controlled by the establishment parties and trade union bureaucracy. So we can see right now they are clamping down on the freedoms of the people, freedom of speech. But they're all out there marching that we need freedom of speech, but they're actually doing the opposite, just as government officials always do. And to push their agendas forward, what do we see? The Islamic State attacking websites in 40 different Spanish towns. At least 40 municipalities in Spain had their websites compromised, with the hackers leaving the message in support of the Islamic State. So we can see right now they're pushing the agenda. In France, we see the French daily Le Monde, hopefully I pronounced that right, has recovered its Twitter account after it was hacked by who? The Syrian Electronic Army. And of course, as we know, all of a sudden we see Syria out there cyber attacking France. It makes no sense. We know this is an inside job. Most likely the SEA is CIA, MI6, Mossad, and they're pushing the agenda that the Syrian Electronic Army is attacking different websites here in the United States, in France, eventually all over the place, because they need to lump this in with the Islamic State. Because eventually, as we know, this is what they'll be doing. This is their agenda, to get Assad. Now we can see there's two Japanese hostages where the Islamic State put out a video, and we know these videos are produced by the site intelligence group. And when you look at the actual photo, we see there's a problem with it already. The shadowing of the faces are in two opposite directions of the hostages. So how is the sun in two different locations? So we can see this was staged completely. But don't worry, the UK is behind Japan, and this was all put into force to push the agenda to bring all countries in, because as they know, they need all countries to fight this war. This will be a world war, and we see they're pushing their agenda very, very hard. Now we see more propaganda out there where they have arrested 5 Russians that might have been planning some type of an attack, and actually they're Chechen, not Russians, and actually they were in a gang-related situation. It wasn't really terrorism. There were no links whatsoever. But of course, as the news continually reports, they're reporting that, yes, Russia has terrorists inside of France. But the reports say the 5 arrested Chechens do not have any links to the terrorist attacks in Paris from 2 weeks ago, and they would not be charged with terrorism. Instead, the men are believed to have gotten into a conflict with another Chechen gang. But of course, the news stories out there always keep the terrorist angle. People look at it, they believe it's Russia, and again, this is more propaganda on the way. And we can see they're using even more propaganda, because they're saying that Al-Qaeda is using all the leaks from Snowden to avoid the the surveillance of the NSA, and they're putting out a video guide on how to avoid being detected. Now, we all know this is fake, phony, and false. We all knew before Snowden. He only confirmed everything. We already knew the NSA, the FBI, DHS. We all knew they were looking at the internet, phone calls. How do they bypass all of this? Easy. Use paper, then destroy the evidence. Guess what? They will never find out what's going on. It's so simple. You don't need a video to show this. This is propaganda to convince people that those whistleblowers are a national security threat. But come on, if you're a true terrorist organization, you know not to go on Facebook, Twitter, to use a cell phone to talk about what you're going to do. You know to use encryption if you're going to do it, that you created on your own, that you know the method, you know the security key. So all of this, again, is propaganda. And of course, Al-Qaeda is out there once again, making threats to the West. And this is from the site monitoring group, saying that, yes, more threats are coming out of Yemen, more threats are coming out of Libya, that they will be attacking the West. And we know they're getting prepared for their main event. We understand they are pushing this as hard as they possibly can. We can see the war has been pushed in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Africa. They're doing whatever they possibly can to get this started. And eventually, what we're going to see is many more events, and then the final one. To blame this on Russia, China, the Islamic State. They need to do this because they do not want to be blamed for this economic collapse. And they're doing everything they possibly can to keep the bubbles inflated just long enough to blame another group, another country, or a combination thereof. And we can see that we all need to be prepared because they prepared themselves. They're ready to go. They're just waiting for the right moment. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.